There's a lot of discussion in our day in regards to democracy. There was a time period when people were much more hopeful regarding democracy. I would say that, let's say 100 years ago or more, it would seem that only democracy works, even though it has its own problems. It's known, the words of Churchill, but with all that, it's still the best of the systems. The others are even worse. So it seemed like democracy is the future. More and more countries will become democratic. Certainly in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it seemed like the world is becoming so much better. There's probably not going to be many major wars anymore. It seemed like more and more countries will become democratic. And democracy seemed like this great ideal that works. And of course, in our Parsha, we read about the Jewish king. So it would seem that the Judaism promotes monarchy. The truth of the matter is that both of these statements that I just made are much more unclear. There's a much more discussion. It's a lot more subtle than just saying, okay, Judaism promotes monarchy. The ideal in today's Western world is democracy. Both things are not so clear, and it's a lot more complex. So let's start with a question of what does Judaism actually promote. The Talmud mentions that there are two opinions in regards to the Jewish king. Was it a mitzvah, or was it a rishut, something that they could they didn't have to do? Meaning, when the Jews required a king, we actually find in Tanakh, in the book of Shmuel, that the prophet Shmuel was unhappy with them. Why was he unhappy if it's a mitzvah to have a king? So there are different explanations, but one opinion in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, that it's not even a mitzvah altogether. One of the sages of the Mishnah thought that it's just rishut, it's permitted to have a king under certain circumstances. Whatever happened in the generation of Shmuel is a separate discussion, which I'm not going to go into right now, why Shmuel was so upset with them. But the way they asked for the king was wrong anyway. But in general, whether it's even a mitzvah to have a king, whether monarchy is what the Torah requires or what the Torah permits, is a dispute. And Rambam, Maimonides Paskins, he rules that in fact it's a mitzvah to have a king. But there are a lot of sages who disagree with this and say that maybe the halacha is, at least it's a possibility that the king is not a requirement, or was not a requirement, at least originally. Of course, the Jewish people eventually chose the king, and ultimately we're waiting for the king Mashiach, right, the descendant of David HaMelech, who will be very righteous and will bring the people in repentance and do a lot of great things. But originally there was a choice, and according to one opinion at least, they could have chosen a different way of government. Now, I saw a quote, I don't remember exactly from which book, but I remember which author was quoted, and that is, it's a certain scholar, a Yemenite scholar, Rabbi Yosef Kapich, who was a big Maimonides scholar. He was very good he was a big researcher into writings of Rambam and also other Sephardic sages, the Rav Saadia Gaon, I think, and certain others. So what I saw is a quote in his name, but like I said, I don't remember from where, that democracy in a certain sense also one fulfills in some way or another. Like the idea is that we have to have a government of some sort. And the democracy one also fulfills partially that mitzvah. Meaning the point is that the government, to some extent at least, is our choice. Now, even when we had kings, and by the way, originally in our history, the first 400 or so years, we didn't have any kings at all. We had shoftim, what was called judges, but also there was always I mentioned, we'll discuss it in a different video, we'll discuss the idea of shoftim and the Supreme Court, the Jewish Sanhedrin, the main Beit Din HaGadol, the great court that consisted of 71 elders, and many other judges that were all over Jewish cities. As our Parsha starts, shoftim v'shotrim. You should have judges and you should have shotrim, I guess the policemen of sorts, the law enforcement. So you should have it in all your cities. There has to be law and order. So the idea is that before we had the first king, we had all kinds of other government parts. And they remained even when we had the king. The king was not an absolute monarch. I mean, in today's day and age, maybe this would be called constitutional monarchy. By the way, there were other branches of government as well. To some extent, you could call the entire system of the temple and the Kohens, the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, as a kind of branch of government. The Avodah, whatever they did in the temple, they also had certain political power in various generations, more or less. And there was also another group, actually. And let's not forget that there was also prophets. There were prophets. And prophets had political power as well. We could see it. Sometimes they would rebuke the king, and the king couldn't do anything against them. Even in the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, when the Jewish people split between Yehuda and Israel, even in Israel, it says that under the king second Yeravam, one of the last kings of the northern kingdom, he could not do anything to the prophet Amos, who was criticizing him. A certain temple priest wanted the king to punish Amos, and the king couldn't do anything, because even in the northern kingdom, priests or prophets did have enough power, and the prophets could, under many kings, even not so righteous kings, prophesize and against the king, and the king couldn't do anything about it. So there was more freedom of speech than, let's say, in Soviet Russia, for example, and in many countries today. So whatever the case may be, we never had absolute monarchy. There was a very complex system of government with many branches and many checks and balances. But it is true that eventually we chose the path of monarchy, and eventually we were promised then that one of the descendants of David, HaMelech, King David, will be a very righteous king who will be at the end of days our leader. Coming back to democracy, I wanted to mention that today it seems a lot of the people are no longer so sure that democracy really works, or that it's even the best. Certainly not for every society. There are societies where democracy leads to horrible things. What the society as a whole elects is just horrid sometimes. The terrorist group could be elected by a democratic process if that's what the people... after all, it's nothing that can stop a country from electing, for instance, Nazis or some other terrorist group, right? It's just a question of what the majority of people believe. The real problem with democracy, everybody understands, that it shouldn't be decided on equal, just the majority opinion. Why should the opinion of people who are neither righteous nor knowledgeable count as much as the opinion of righteous and knowledgeable people? So in Judaism, it was always emphasized that the opinion of many non-specialists doesn't equal even one opinion of a specialist. And this is true, by the way, in all other branches, except for the democratic process of election of the government. Think about it for a moment. That let's say the decision is made with regards to someone's life, and in the hospital they decide they'll just take the majority opinion between all the nurses and all the visitors and whoever, right? Even regular doctors are not going to have a lot of say. It's going to be only the greatest doctors who know this particular type of disease and this particular operation, whether it's worthwhile to make an operation or not. It's going to be decided only by the greatest specialists. That's whose opinion counts. The difficulty is that how do you do it in a democratic system? What laws do you set up so that the people who vote are at least knowledgeable on what they vote for? Right? The majority of people, they have no idea. They go by whatever the promises are, or whoever is more likable on the outside and whatever. So these are not the types of things that should decide who is going to be our president. But how do you decide who is going to be the actual voters? Now, originally, by the way, America had some kind of a system that was trying to prevent this mistake that the masses could make, and that is the electoral college. Today, it's almost not changing anything. It could change a little bit by the fact that if the person may lose the popular vote and still win because of the electoral vote. But still, the electoral vote is decided basically not by the electoral college, but by the people. So if the majority of New Yorkers vote even a very bad candidate, the electoral college, the representatives of New York will have to get that vote entirely for that person. But originally the plan was that they actually have a say. And if the Electoral College thinks that the people made a mistake and whoever they voted in we don't really want such a person to be our president, it's going to be dangerous to have such a person, then they could actually annul the will of the people. So something of that nature, if a system like that could be resurrected, but again, who is going to decide? Who are the people on the level to decide what is good and what is not good for society, and which president is not going to be good for America, and that the people's wish could be annulled? It's a very complex situation. That's why the democracy is in practice practiced almost everywhere in the West, because they don't really want to make rules of, okay, let's say only people who are working can vote. Only people who have property could vote. There were such laws in old times. It makes a lot of sense, right? That the people who take from society shouldn't be the ones voting, because then if the society has a lot of such people, then the politicians tend to move to socialism or worse to communism, because that's what the majority of people who don't want to work will want, and they'll just vote these people in. Right, so it's a problem when everybody can vote. For instance, the Democrats would love to have people who were in jail also have a right to vote. Interesting, right? Who do you think is going to benefit? Obviously, the Democrats, because the majority of people who were in jail, who were convicted of something, they're mostly going to vote for Democrats. Right? But is it good if these people have the same vote as the greatest righteous people? No, it's not a good thing. That's why I don't think in America this law has been able was I'm not sure, maybe in some states, I'm not sure what the current situation is, but generally in most places they still don't allow people who were actually committed crime and set in jail for it, that they should be able to vote afterwards, and certainly not be able to vote from the jail itself. But is it possible that one day they're going to give these people rights to vote? Sure. If the Democrats will take over the government, they could pass such a law. And just like we don't allow generally people who are in jail to vote, there could be a possibility to, let's say, require people who are voting to pass a minimal exam. If they don't know anything about the history of the United States, like a person doesn't know who the president was, let's say the first president, Washington, right? Then this type of person probably has no idea about today's politics either, and his vote is useless. It's based on criteria that's not acceptable. So just like to become a citizen of the United States, you have to pass an exam. So too, maybe to be able to vote, there would be a minimal exam to check the person's intelligence and the person's understanding, at least, of minimal history. Otherwise, how could this person vote and decide the most important decision that is made? Not who is going to be the president of some company. Right? No company is going to have just a vote between the workers of who's going to be their CEO. And yet, when it comes to the president of the United States, everybody gets the same vote. So it's not really a great thing. But it used to work in certain societies, and to some extent it works today in the West. But a lot of times it doesn't really work. So democracy has its own limitations, and of course different countries have different laws in terms of how their democracy works. And we're really, in America, we're a republic. It's not really originally, at least it was meant somewhat differently. Whatever the case may be, like I said, in Judaism also things are not so obvious, and it's not so clear which system is the ideal, and whether the king was originally planned to be the ideal system. But even, as I said, when we are praying for the coming of Mashiach, for the coming of the king, we're not asking for a complete monarchy. We're asking for a person who is going to lead us to good, but who will be checked and balanced by all kinds of other mechanisms, Bezrat Hashem. And may we soon see the times of Mashiach and what the Jewish government will be like. That would be very interesting to see, I would say, the times of Mashiach and how the government would function then. And if you like this video, please press like and please subscribe to our channel.